Let's be honest, Carolyn. You were built to renovate mansions, not live in them. You are just the help with a master's degree. Madison's voice was bored. She slid the property deed across the mahogany table, not even looking at me. My parents leaned forward, holding their breath, staring at the paper like it was a winning lottery ticket. They were waiting for me to cry. They were waiting for me to beg for the house I had spent 2 years restoring with my own hands. I didn't scream. I didn't flinch. I simply uncapped my pen. The scratch of the nib against the paper sounded like a match being struck. "It is all yours," I said. I signed the transfer. I slid it back. They thought they were accepting a gift. I knew I was handing them a grenade, with the pin pulled. Drop a comment, and let me know where you are listening from, and what time it is for you right now. I would love to know who is part of our community. I didn't wait for them to check the ink. I didn't wait for my father to pour a celebratory drink, or for my mother to offer a fake apology about how this is for the best. I simply turned my back on them and walked toward the foyer. Near the heavy oak door, a single carry-on suitcase sat waiting. It was small, battered, and contained everything I actually cared about: my laptop, a few changes of clothes, and my hard drives. "That's it?" Madison's voice drifted from the parlor, sharp with confusion. She had followed me, probably hoping for one last scene. One final moment of me begging to stay in the guest room of the house I had resurrected. "You're just leaving? You don't even want to say goodbye to the place?" I stopped, my hand hovering over the brass doorknob. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the master set of keys. They were heavy antique brass skeletons that I had spent months tracking down to match the original 1850s locks. To Madison, they looked like trophies. To me, they felt like shackles. I tossed them onto the entryway table. The metal hit the polished wood with a loud, final clatter that echoed through the silence of the house. "It's all yours, Madison," I said, my voice steady. "The keys, the view, the legacy. Enjoy it." I opened the door and stepped out into the thick, humid embrace of the Savannah night. The air smelled of jasmine and impending rain. I walked down the limestone steps I had repaired with my own hands, the wheels of my suitcase clicking softly against the pavement. That sound, the rhythmic click of wheels on stone, triggered a realization that hit me harder than the humidity. It was the realization of the light suitcase. Society tells us that accumulation is the only metric of success. We are taught to gather assets, to fill rooms with furniture, to anchor ourselves with property deeds and heavy keys. My family thought they had just won the lottery because they were now standing inside a mansion filled with history. They thought I was the loser because I was walking away with nothing but a carry-on. But they were wrong. There is a specific kind of freedom that only comes when you realize your assets were actually anchors dragging you to the bottom of the ocean. My suitcase was light because I wasn't carrying their expectations anymore. I wasn't carrying the dry rot, the leaking roof, or the crushing weight of their approval. I had stripped my life down to the essentials. And in doing so, I had become untouchable. You can't threaten to take something away from someone who has already let it go. I reached my car, a sensible sedan parked under the Spanish moss, and threw my bag into the trunk. I looked back at the house one last time. The windows were glowing with warm light. A picture-perfect southern dream. Inside, they were probably toasting to their victory, unaware that they were drinking inside the belly of a beast that was starving for cash. My name is Carolyn. I'm 32 years old, and I am a historic preservation architect. I know better than anyone that the most beautiful buildings are often the most dangerous traps. I didn't just walk away from a house tonight. I walked away from a prison sentence. And I was the only one who knew the execution date. My new apartment was a 20-minute drive from the historic district, but it felt like traveling to a different century. I pulled into the parking garage of the converted textile mill. The air here didn't smell like jasmine and old money. It smelled like concrete and rain. I took the elevator to the 4th floor, keyed in my code, and stepped inside. The loft was open, industrial, and brutally efficient. No crown molding to dust, no antique glass to protect, just steel beams and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Atlanta skyline. I set my suitcase down and poured a glass of water. My hand was steady. People might ask why I didn't fight them, why I didn't hire a lawyer when they demanded the deed. To understand that, you have to understand what that house was 5 years ago. It wasn't a mansion then. It was a carcass. I bought it at a tax auction for $60,000. It had no roof, no plumbing, and a colony of raccoons living in the master suite. The city had condemned it 3 times. My father had laughed when I signed the papers. He called it Carolyn's folly. He told me I was throwing my life away on a pile of kindling. For 5 years, I didn't take a vacation. I didn't go out on Friday nights. I spent every spare dollar and every spare hour inside those walls. I learned the chemistry of lime mortar because modern cement destroys historic brick. I sourced period-correct heart pine from a demolished factory in Alabama to match the flooring. I navigated the labyrinth of the Savannah Historic Preservation Board, memorizing their codes better than their own inspectors. My family? They never lifted a finger. Not once. When I was stripping lead paint in 100-degree heat, Madison was on spring break in Cabo. When I was arguing with structural engineers about load-bearing walls, my mother was hosting bridge club. They treated the house like a quarantine zone, until the appraisal came in. 2 months ago, the renovations were finally complete. The carcass was now a pristine, historical landmark valued at $2.4 million. Suddenly, the family group chat lit up. Suddenly, they wanted to come over for dinner. I remember that dinner clearly. It was a Tuesday. My mother brought a lasagna and a bottle of cheap wine. They waited until dessert to slide the knife in. "We've been thinking," my father had said, wiping tomato sauce from his lip. "This house, it's too much for one person. It's a family estate. And since we're looking to downsize for retirement, and Madison is starting her new life, it just makes sense," my mother interrupted. "You're always working, Carolyn. You're never home. Madison needs a stable base. And honestly, we paid for your undergraduate degree. Think of this as squaring the ledger." Squaring the ledger. They didn't see the 5 years of sweat equity. They didn't see the architectural mastery. They just saw a $2 million asset sitting on a table, and they decided they deserved to eat it. I could have fought them in court. I had the receipts. But as I sat there listening to them divvy up my hard work, I realized something. They didn't want the house. They wanted the image of the house. They wanted the prestige of owning a Savannah landmark without understanding the discipline required to keep it standing. That was when I decided to sign the papers. Fighting them would have cost me years of litigation and emotional energy. Giving them exactly what they wanted was free. I walked to the window of my loft and looked out at the city lights. They thought they had bullied me out of a fortune. They didn't know about the historic preservation covenants I had signed to get the tax credits. They didn't know about the specialized maintenance schedule required to keep the warranty on the slate roof valid. They didn't know that the mansion was actually a high-performance machine that required a skilled operator, and they had just fired the only engineer who knew how to turn it on. I took a sip of water. The water was cold. The room was quiet. I wasn't the victim. I was the architect who had just walked off the job site, leaving the amateurs to pour the foundation. 2 weeks later, the digital victory lap began. I was sitting in my loft, organizing my new workspace, when the notifications started rolling in. I hadn't unfollowed them. In my line of work, you never look away from a site inspection, especially when the structure is unstable. Madison was posting 3 times a day. First, a selfie on the grand staircase I had spent a month stripping by hand. Caption: Queen of the Manor. Number New Beginnings. Number Estate Life. Then, a video tour of the parlor, where she spun around in a dress that cost more than my first car. Caption: Finally bringing some class to this old place. Watch this space for the glow-up. She called it a glow-up. I called it a desecration of historical integrity. But I kept scrolling. Then came the phone call. It was my mother. She wasn't calling to check on me. She was calling to perform. "Carolyn," she chirped, her voice echoing slightly, likely because she was standing in the foyer with the speakerphone on. "We just wanted to give you an update. We have a landscape architect here right now. A very expensive one." "Is that so?" I asked, leaning back in my ergonomic chair. "Yes. We are tearing out that dusty old English garden you spent so much time on. It's just too dreary. We are putting in an infinity pool. It will look right over the marsh. And the carriage house? We are gutting it. We're going to turn it into a luxury Airbnb rental. Passive income. Carolyn, that is how wealth is built." I took a slow sip of water. "An infinity pool requires digging 12 feet down into a marshland foundation," I said, my voice level. "And the carriage house is a protected structure under the preservation deed. You need permits for that. Federal permits." My father laughed in the background. It was a loud, arrogant sound. Always the pessimist. "You think you're the only one who knows how to run a project? We have the capital now. We have the vision. We don't need your little permits." "Capital?" I asked. "Did you win the lottery, Dad?" "We took out a line of credit against the house," he bragged. "The equity is massive. We are reinvesting it. That is what smart investors do. They were borrowing against an asset they didn't understand to build illegal additions they couldn't maintain. They were eating the equity before the ink was even dry on the deed." "Well," my mother sighed, the faux sympathy dripping from the receiver. "We just wanted to let you know. We didn't want you to be surprised when you saw the photos. How is your situation? Madison said you rented a loft downtown. Is it terribly small?" "It's efficient," I said. "It has heating that works, and I own nothing in it but my laptop and my peace of mind." "That sounds quaint," she said. "Well, we have to go. The pool contractor is talking about Italian marble coping. Enjoy your apartment, dear. The line went dead. I looked at my phone. They believed they were untouchable. They believed that owning the keys made them kings. They didn't understand that they were just squatters in a museum that was about to wake up and reject them. I pulled up the public records database for the Savannah Historic Review Board on my laptop. I didn't file a report. I didn't have to. I just checked the agenda for the next inspection cycle. They were spending tens of thousands of dollars on architects for an infinity pool that would never be built. They were leveraging the house to destroy the very things that gave it value. I closed my laptop. They wanted a glow-up. They were about to get a demolition order. The notification didn't come from my mother. It didn't come from Madison or my father. It came from the city of Savannah's automated permitting system. I was standing in a conference room in Atlanta, presenting a rendering for a new municipal library, when my tablet buzzed. Because I still held a general contractor's license in Chatham County, and because my name was technically still associated with the property's history in the database, the system flagged the address. Address: 402 Abercorn Street. Violation: unpermitted exterior alteration. Applying masonry coating to historic brick. Status: stop work order issued. I almost stopped my presentation. They had painted it. They had taken the Savannah gray brick, hand-fired by enslaved artisans in the 1850s. A material so rare and porous that it is illegal to seal it, and they had painted it white. I could picture it perfectly. Madison had likely seen a trend on social media. She wanted that crisp, modern farmhouse look. She didn't know that historic brick needs to breathe. She didn't know that modern acrylic paint acts like plastic wrap, trapping moisture inside the masonry until the brick face spalls off and turns to dust. She hadn't just committed an aesthetic crime. She had committed structural murder. I finished my presentation. I shook hands with the city planners. I walked back to my desk and sat down. 10 minutes later, the phone calls started. First Madison, then my father, then my mother. The phone vibrated across the surface of my desk like a trapped insect. I watched the screen light up. Madison, call me back now. There is a guy here from the city. He put a neon orange sticker on the front door. He says we have to stop construction. Dad, Carol, you know the people on the Historic Review Board. Call them. Tell them it's a misunderstanding. We're just upgrading the curb appeal. Mom. They are threatening to fine us $500 a day. Fix this. Fix this. That was their mantra. I was the fixer. I was the one who navigated the red tape. The one who charmed the inspectors. The one who knew which forms to file in triplicate. They thought my influence was a family heirloom they could borrow whenever they broke something. But influence isn't an heirloom. It is currency earned through years of competence. And I wasn't going to spend my currency to bail out their vandalism. I didn't answer. I didn't text back. Instead, I opened the public portal for the Historic Review Board on my laptop. I pulled up the case file. The inspector had uploaded photos. The entire first floor of the facade was covered in bright, blinding white paint. It looked like a scar on the streetscape. The orange stop work order was plastered right in the center of the mahogany door I had spent a week refinishing. To remove that paint without destroying the brick underneath would require chemical stripping by a specialist team. It would cost 3 times as much as the painting itself, and until it was removed, they couldn't touch the house. No pool. No Airbnb renovations. No glow-up. They were frozen. I looked at my phone one last time. My father was calling again. I pressed the volume button on the side of the phone, silencing the ring. This wasn't just a fine. This was the first domino. They had alerted the city that they were rogue operators. Now, the inspectors would be looking closer. They would check the permits for the pool. They would check the electrical work for the carriage house. They had invited the wolf to the door, and they had painted the door bright white to make sure he couldn't miss it. I turned back to my library schematics. The structural integrity of my new life was holding. Theirs was just beginning to crumble. 3 days after the stop work order was posted, my phone rang. It wasn't my family. It was a local number I didn't recognize, but the area code belonged to one of the most expensive legal firms in Savannah. I answered on the second ring. Arthur Sterling introduced himself, my family's new lawyer, and demanded I lift a stop work order. They believed I was using Historic Review Board contacts to sabotage them. He even threatened a lawsuit. I asked whether he had actually read the deed history. He hadn't. When I told him to check the easement filed 4 years ago under the Federal Historic Preservation tax credits, the phone went silent. He discovered what I already knew. The house's exterior couldn't be altered. No short-term rentals allowed. No pool. No paint changes. And any violation triggered a $200,000 tax clawback plus interest. Maintenance alone ran $5,000 a month, and failure meant forfeiture of the property. It dawned on him the mansion was not a $2 million prize. It was a federally protected money pit. My family had borrowed against it, spent the loan, and now the bank was poised to demand repayment. They weren't victims. They were trapped by their own negligence. Weeks later, they stormed into my office, disheveled, broke, and terrified, thrusting a citation at me for failing historic standards. They begged me to take back the deed they had proudly seized. When I refused, they accused me of setting them up. I reminded them that I had warned them over dinner, over breadsticks, and they ignored me because greed makes people deaf. They insisted the house was worth millions. I told them it was worth less than zero. Then I walked them out. 6 months later, the property was sold for pennies to the Historical Society. My parents moved into a cramped rental and told everyone a predatory lender and an ungrateful daughter ruined their lives. They still refused to admit they sank themselves. And me? I lived in a small Atlanta loft, debt-free and peaceful. My bank account was steady, my time was my own, and the only projects on my desk were ones I chose. My family believed they stole a gold mine. In truth, they stole a museum piece that demanded a curator. They chased the illusion of wealth, and it devoured them like a modern Midas curse. I walked away with nothing but a carry-on and became the richest person among them, not by square footage, but by freedom. If you've ever had to save yourself by letting others drown in their own choices, you'll understand exactly what happened next.